Tonight, we're going on the most incredible journey in human history. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Picture yourself traveling back in time to thousands of years ago, before the world was anything like we know it today. There were no cars, no airplanes, and no phones, but people were starting to build the first cities and make incredible discoveries that still shape our world. This place I'm talking about was called Mesopotamia. It's often referred to as the cradle of civilization, and it's one of the most important places in all of human history. But let's take a closer look at why this place is so special. Before we begin, here's a quick favor. Before you get settled, please like this video and subscribe. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Just drop a comment and let me know. It's always wonderful to see people from all around the world joining us. Now take a deep breath, turn down your lights, maybe switch off that fan or any background noise, and let's start this peaceful journey together. We're about to explore one of the oldest and most fascinating stories in human history, the story of Mesopotamia. Let's travel back in time, far back to a time before the internet, before computers, and even before modern-day countries existed. Mesopotamia was an ancient land where two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, flowed side by side. Picture these rivers like two huge snakes, winding their way through a vast landscape. And this land, sitting between those two rivers, became the home of one of the world's first great civilizations. Now imagine the sun shining over the land, the rivers sparkling like mirrors, and the earth rich and fertile. This was the land of Mesopotamia, a place where life began in a way we might not expect. The soil was so rich because of the water from the rivers, and because of that, it allowed the people who lived there to grow food, build cities, and develop their own way of life. Today, this place is what we call Iraq, but it also covers parts of Syria and Turkey. Can you imagine the rivers flowing gently through this land, providing everything the people needed to survive and thrive? So, why should we care about Mesopotamia? You might be asking, what makes this land so special? Well, here's the thing. Mesopotamia is where it all started. It's where the very first cities were built, where the first written language was invented, and where the first laws were created to help people live together in peace. It's not just another place in history. Mesopotamia was the birthplace of the things that made the modern world what it is today. Let me tell you more about why that is. Writing. Imagine a time when there were no books, no letters, and no messages written down. How could people keep track of things like who owed money or how many cows they had? The Mesopotamians invented writing, and they used it to keep track of everything from stories to shopping lists. The first form of writing they used was called cuneiform, which was made by pressing sharp tools into wet clay tablets. The tablets were like ancient notebooks, but instead of paper, they used clay. People would write on them to record important events, laws, and even stories. One of the most famous stories ever written, the Epic of Gilgamesh, came from Mesopotamia. Laws. Another huge invention from Mesopotamia was laws. Imagine living in a time when there were no rules to follow. People could just do whatever they wanted. But in Mesopotamia, they came up with some of the first laws ever written down. One of the most famous rulers, King Hammurabi, created a set of rules called Hammurabi's Code. This code helped the people know what was right and wrong, and it helped punish people who broke the rules. Some of these laws may sound harsh today, but they were important for bringing order to a very busy and growing society. Cities and buildings. Now, the people of Mesopotamia weren't just inventing things on paper, they were also building amazing things with their hands. They didn't just live in small villages. They created huge cities made of mud bricks, tall ziggurats, which were giant stepped pyramids, and large marketplaces. These cities were full of busy streets where people worked, traded goods, and lived together. So, what was it actually like to live in Mesopotamia? Life there wasn't like what we see today. There were no cars, no phones, and no computers. But they had creative solutions to everyday problems, and they worked together to make their world a better place. Let me tell you how. Farmers and irrigation. Most of the people in Mesopotamia were farmers, But how did they grow food in a land that was so hot and dry? Well, they came up with an amazing idea. They created irrigation systems. They dug canals to bring water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to their crops, and because of this, they could grow things like wheat, barley, and vegetables. This made the land really fertile, and they were able to feed many people. These systems were so smart, they're still being used today in some parts of the world. Craftsmen and builders. But Mesopotamians didn't just farm. They were also skilled craftsmen, making pottery, metal tools, and beautiful jewelry. Some people worked as builders who created homes, temples, and even the famous ziggurats. These were the tall temples made of clay bricks where people went to pray to the gods. Trade. Mesopotamians didn't just trade with each other. They traded with people from faraway lands. They would travel and exchange goods like wheat, barley, cloth, and metal tools. They also traded ideas, learning from other cultures and making their own society even stronger. Now, let's talk about something that was super important in Mesopotamian life, their gods. The Mesopotamians believed in many gods and goddesses, and they thought these gods controlled everything. The sun, the rain, even the future. Everything was in the hands of the gods. Each city had its own special god or goddess. The people believed that the gods lived in temples, and these temples were called ziggurats. The tallest ziggurat in each city was considered the home of the god. People would go to these ziggurats to pray, make offerings, and ask for help. They believed that if they didn't keep their gods happy, they might face bad harvests or disasters. So, they did everything they could to honor them. By now you might be wondering, why does this all matter to me today? Well, let me tell you something really cool. Without Mesopotamia's inventions and ideas, the world wouldn't be the way it is today. Writing. Without the invention of writing, we wouldn't have books, newspapers, or even text messages. Think about that next time you send a text. Laws. Without the laws created by the Mesopotamians, we might not have the justice systems we rely on today. Imagine a world with no rules. It would be pretty chaotic, right? Cities. The cities that the Mesopotamians built were some of the first in the world. They taught us how to organize and build in ways that make our cities today run smoothly. Now that you know a little bit about Mesopotamia and why it's so important, we're just getting started. Next, we'll travel back to when the Sumerians, the very first people to build cities, lived in Mesopotamia. They created some of the first written stories and invented things that would change the world forever. Stay with me as we continue our journey through this incredible chapter of human history. Before you get settled, please like this video and subscribe. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is. Just drop a comment and let me know. It's always wonderful to see people from around the world joining us for these midnight journeys of the heart. Now turn down your lights, maybe switch off that fan or any background noise, and let's start this peaceful journey together. The birth of Mesopotamian civilization. The Sumerians. Imagine stepping into a world more than 5,000 years ago in a land that would later be known as Mesopotamia. The land was mostly a vast stretch of dry, arid land bordered by the great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, with large stretches of unbroken wilderness. But within this wilderness, the Sumerians began their journey to become one of the world's first great civilizations. The transformation from simple farming communities to sophisticated city-states wasn't an accident. It was the result of careful planning and a desire to adapt and thrive. Around 3500 BCE, the Sumerians learned how to harness the power of the rivers, using their annual floods to their advantage. This early stage of civilization saw the creation of irrigation systems which were nothing short of revolutionary. By diverting water to their fields through canals and dikes, they were able to control when and where the crops grew. This allowed them to grow surplus food that could feed more people than ever before. As a result, communities began to form agricultural hubs. With the surplus food came the need for organized leadership, more structured social roles, and an increase in trade with neighboring regions. Cities began to emerge, and these settlements grew into powerful city-states. Among the most famous of these were Uruk, Ur, and Lagash. At this time, it was becoming clear that the Sumerians had a profound understanding of their environment. They weren't just surviving, they were creating a system where they could thrive and build complex, organized societies. Sumerian city-states. A city-state in Sumer was more than just a cluster of buildings and homes. It was an entire society built around a central temple and led by a king who acted as both a religious and political leader. The most famous of these city-states was Uruk, which is often considered the first true city in the world. Located along the Euphrates River, Uruk was a bustling, thriving city with an estimated population of over 50,000 people during its peak. What made these cities so unique? At their core, they were incredibly organized, with walls surrounding the city for protection, as well as public spaces, markets, and temples. These cities weren't just places for people to live, they were designed to foster trade, worship, and governance. The streets of Uruk were filled with traders selling everything from food to luxurious goods like jewelry and pottery. And at the center of it all stood the ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid that housed the temple dedicated to the gods. There were other significant cities in Sumer, such as Ur and Lagash. Ur, for instance, is famous for its grand ziggurat, which was dedicated to the moon god Nana. The city of Lagash was known for its artistic achievements, including beautiful sculptures and monumental inscriptions that recorded the reign of its kings. These cities represented the birth of urbanization, where people moved away from rural life into more organized, structured communities. The growth of city-states was a natural outcome of the need for defense, trade, and religious practices. It was the rise of urban centers that would become the heart of civilization for thousands of years to come. The invention of cuneiform writing and the first forms of literature. As these cities grew, so did the need for an efficient means of communication. Around 3500 BCE, the Sumerians developed one of the most important inventions in human history: writing. But unlike the writing systems we use today, early Sumerian writing wasn't based on letters or an alphabet. Instead, it used pictographs, images that represented objects or actions. This writing system eventually evolved into cuneiform, which means wedge-shaped. Cuneiform was written by using a reed stylus to press marks into wet clay tablets. The marks were small, wedge-shaped impressions that could represent both objects and abstract ideas. Cuneiform was a breakthrough in human communication because it allowed people to record information such as trade, taxes, royal decrees, and religious texts. One of the most famous pieces of literature written in cuneiform is the Epic of Gilgamesh, a long poem that tells the story of the king of Uruk, Gilgamesh, and his search for immortality. The story centers on Gilgamesh's quest to understand the meaning of life and death. It reflects the deep philosophical and spiritual concerns of the Sumerians, who were trying to make sense of their existence in a world controlled by powerful gods and unpredictable forces. The Epic of Gilgamesh isn't just a work of literature, it's a reflection of the human experience. It touches on themes like friendship, death, love, and the quest for meaning. This story, passed down through generations, became one of the world's oldest epics and set the stage for the literature that would follow in other ancient cultures. The role of religion and mythology. Mesopotamian gods and their influence on everyday life. Religion was deeply intertwined with every aspect of Sumerian life. The Sumerians believed that their gods controlled everything: the weather, the crops, fertility, and even the fate of kings. They believed that the gods not only created the world, but were also responsible for its upkeep. The gods were thought to live in the heavens or in sacred places like the ziggurats, and the people needed to keep the gods happy to avoid their wrath. There were many gods in the Sumerian pantheon, each of them governing a specific aspect of life. Here are a few of the most important ones. Anu, the sky god and the chief god in Sumerian belief. He was the ruler of the heavens and the god of kingship and justice. Enki, the god of water, wisdom and creation. He was responsible for the fertility of the land and the well-being of humanity. Inanna, the goddess of love, beauty and war. Inanna's stories were among the most famous in Sumerian mythology, and she represented both the nurturing and destructive forces of life. Utu, the sun god and the god of justice, who helped guide decisions in battles and governance. These gods were not just part of religious rituals, they were present in everyday life. From the work of farmers who prayed for good harvests, to kings who consulted their priests for divine approval, the gods were the ultimate authority. The Sumerians believed that if the gods were pleased, the people would enjoy prosperity. But if the gods were angered, they could bring down terrible punishments, such as floods, famine, or disease. The ziggurats and the religious significance of architecture. The ziggurat was the most important architectural symbol in Sumer. These massive step pyramids were built as temples to the gods. Ziggurats were designed to reach toward the heavens, symbolizing the connection between the earth and the gods. Each city had its own ziggurat, and the tallest one in any city was usually located in the center, next to the temple, dedicated to the city's patron god. Ziggurats weren't just religious buildings, they were also symbols of political power. The king of each city-state was often considered the divinely chosen ruler of the people. He was the spiritual leader as well as the political leader, and his ability to build monumental structures like ziggurats showed his relationship with the gods. The ziggurats were intended to be the dwelling places of the gods, and only priests could enter the inner sanctuaries. The ziggurat at Ur was particularly magnificent, and it remains one of the most iconic architectural remains from ancient Mesopotamia. The Sumerians believed that the gods resided in these towering temples, and by building such monumental structures, they were ensuring the gods' protection and favor. Social structure and innovations. Class systems, slavery, and the emergence of a priestly class. Sumerian society was hierarchical, with a complex class system that placed the king and priests at the top. These two groups had the most power and influence in society, and their roles were often intertwined. The priesthood played a huge role in the day-to-day life of the Sumerians. The priests were seen as the only people who could communicate directly with the gods, so they held immense power. Kings and priests. The king, often regarded as the divinely appointed ruler, had authority over the people and the cities. He was believed to be chosen by the gods to uphold order and ensure prosperity. The priests and priestesses, on the other hand, were responsible for conducting religious ceremonies and overseeing the temples. Merchants, artisans, and farmers. Beneath the priests and kings were the merchants, artisans, and farmers who kept the cities running. Merchants traded goods like textiles, copper, and food, while artisans crafted beautiful jewelry, pottery, and weapons. Farmers grew the food that fed everyone, and their work was vital to the survival of the cities. Slaves. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the slaves. Many of them were prisoners of war or people who had fallen into debt. They performed the hardest work, often in the homes of the wealthy or in the temples. Slavery was an accepted part of Sumerian society, and slaves had few rights. Early technological advancements. The Sumerians were incredibly inventive. They made advancements in almost every field, from agriculture to mathematics to transportation. Let's take a closer look at some of the key inventions that came out of ancient Sumer. The wheel. One of the most important Sumerian inventions was the wheel. The Sumerians are credited with inventing the potter's wheel, which revolutionized pottery. It allowed for the creation of more uniform and decorative vessels. But the wheel was also used in transportation. The Sumerians were among the first to use the wheel for carts and wagons, making it easier to move goods and materials across the land. Irrigation. The development of irrigation systems was another breakthrough. The Sumerians built canals and dams to divert water from the rivers to their crops. This ensured a steady supply of water, even during dry seasons. Their knowledge of water management was so advanced that it allowed them to support a growing population and become the agricultural backbone of the region. Mathematics and astronomy. The Sumerians also made huge advancements in mathematics and astronomy. They developed a base 60 system for counting and measuring time, which is still used today for telling time, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. In astronomy, they created early star charts and used the movement of the planets to predict eclipses and other celestial events. The Sumerians laid the foundation for many aspects of modern civilization. From agriculture and writing to religion and social structure, they created the building blocks of what would become one of the most influential cultures in human history. Their innovations, both practical and intellectual, transformed the region and set the stage for the rise of later empires like the Akkadian and Babylonian civilizations. As we continue this journey through Mesopotamian history, we'll move forward to the rise of the Akkadian Empire and explore how the Sumerians' achievements were expanded upon and carried forward to shape the world even more. Stay with me as we dive deeper into the fascinating history of this remarkable civilization. The rise of the Akkadian Empire, Sargon of Akkad. The unification of Sumer and Akkad under Sargon's leadership. To understand the Akkadian Empire and how it rose to power, we must first understand the context in which Sargon of Akkad emerged. Around 2334 BCE, Mesopotamia was divided into a series of independent city-states, including powerful cities like Uruk, Ur, and Lagash. These cities, though wealthy and influential, were constantly in competition with one another. Trade was essential, but their rivalries often led to wars and conflict. Each city-state had its own king, its own laws, and its own religious practices, and they saw themselves as individual entities rather than parts of a larger whole. The person who would change all of this was Sargon, a man who began as a humble servant in the court of King Ur-Zababa of Kish. Sargon's rise to power was, in many ways, an example of chance and ambition. According to legend, Sargon was a cupbearer to the king, and after a series of political intrigues and military strategies, Sargon overthrew his master and took control of Akkad. However, his ambitions went beyond just ruling Akkad. His eyes were set on unifying the various Sumerian city-states and bringing all of Mesopotamia under his control. In this way, he began to create the first true empire in history. The first conquests. Sargon's first target was Uruk, one of the most powerful Sumerian cities at the time. His army, though small at first, was highly trained and organized. Sargon's military genius lay in his ability to mobilize his forces quickly and strategically, using his knowledge of the region and its cities to his advantage. In a matter of months, he had successfully captured Uruk, and from there he quickly moved on to conquer Lagash and Nippur, two other major Sumerian cities. Unity through force and diplomacy. What made Sargon's unification of Sumer and Akkad unique was that he didn't just conquer these city-states by force. He was a diplomat as well. He established alliances with certain rulers and encouraged them to join his cause. He also used marriages as a political tool, marrying into important families to solidify his alliances. By combining military might and political strategy, Sargon was able to create a sense of unity across Mesopotamia, blending different peoples, cultures, and religious practices into a single empire. Religious and cultural integration. One of the most impressive aspects of Sargon's rule was his ability to integrate the religious practices of the various Sumerian city-states into his empire. Sargon, like many rulers of his time, saw himself as divinely chosen to lead. He was associated with the gods and was seen as the mouthpiece of the divine on earth. He encouraged the worship of the Sumerian gods, but also promoted the cult of Ninurta, the Akkadian god of war. This religious integration helped to unite the diverse regions of the Akkadian Empire and allowed Sargon to maintain power over his sprawling territory. the establishment of the first empire in world history. Sargon's achievement, creating the first empire, was not just about territorial conquest. It was about the establishment of a centralized government that could oversee the affairs of a vast, multi-ethnic, and multilingual region. For the first time in history, a single ruler had control over a territory that spanned thousands of miles from the Persian Gulf in the south to Syria in the north. This was revolutionary for its time, as prior to this, Mesopotamia had been a patchwork of independent, isolated city-states. Centralized bureaucracy. Sargon established a centralized system of government. He appointed governors to rule over different regions of the empire, ensuring that all areas followed a common set of laws and standards. Each province was required to pay tribute to the central government, and Sargon had tax collectors and inspectors sent throughout the empire to ensure that resources were being efficiently used. This level of organization allowed Sargon to manage the vast territories of his empire with surprising efficiency. Military innovations and the standing army. One of the greatest strengths of the Akkadian Empire was its military. Sargon understood the importance of having a strong army and maintained a standing army that was always ready to defend the empire and expand its borders. This army was not only composed of foot soldiers, but also included chariots, which gave the Akkadians a distinct military advantage over their enemies. Sargon's soldiers were highly trained, and the army was organized into specialized units, each with specific roles. This allowed Sargon to maintain control over his vast empire and to subdue any rebellions or invasions. Sargon's legacy. Sargon's empire-building strategy was revolutionary. His military tactics, political strategy, and governance style influenced generations of rulers. He set the stage for the Babylonian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, and many other empires that followed in Mesopotamia. His rule also established the idea that empires could be centralized, with a strong king at the top, surrounded by a network of governors and administrators. The Akkadian language becoming the lingua franca of Mesopotamia. One of Sargon's most enduring contributions to the history of Mesopotamia was the spread of the Akkadian language. Akkadian, a Semitic language, was already spoken in the north, but it was with Sargon's unification of Mesopotamia that it became the official language of the entire empire. From Sumerian to Akkadian. Before the rise of Akkad, the Sumerian language had been the dominant language in the region. Sumerian was an isolated language, meaning it wasn't related to any other known languages of the time. However, as Sargon's empire expanded, the Akkadian language, which was easier to learn and more flexible, became the lingua franca of Mesopotamia, Akkadian as a cultural tool. The spread of Akkadian wasn't just about communication, it was about creating a shared cultural identity. As the Akkadian language became the language of administration, trade, and literature, it unified the diverse peoples of the empire. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, was written in Akkadian, even though the story itself had origins in Sumerian culture. Akkadian, over time, became the language used for legal documents, royal decrees, and even religious texts. Cultural exchange and political strategies. Sargon's empire didn't just impact Mesopotamia, it sent ripples through the surrounding regions as well. The influence of the Akkadian Empire extended well beyond the boundaries of Mesopotamia, and it shaped the cultures and civilizations around it. Elamites. To the east of Mesopotamia lay Elam, an ancient civilization located in what is now southwestern Iran. The Akkadian Empire's expansion into Elam brought the Elamites into direct contact with the Akkadians. The Elamites adopted many aspects of Akkadian culture, including the cuneiform script, which became used alongside their own writing system. The political and military influence of the Akkadians also had a lasting impact on Elamite rulers, and the Akkadian language was spoken as a diplomatic language for several centuries. Anatolia. To the northwest, Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, became a key area of influence. As trade routes expanded, Akkadian culture reached the Hittites and Hurrians who lived in this region. These peoples adopted many aspects of Akkadian art and architecture, and Akkadian words began to appear in their languages, particularly in administrative and trade contexts. The Levant. To the west of Mesopotamia lay the Levant, home to the ancient Canaanites and early Phoenicians. The Akkadian Empire established trade routes to the Levant, bringing with it goods such as grain, metals, and pottery. The Levant became an important point in the Akkadian Empire's trade network, connecting Mesopotamia with the ancient civilizations of the Mediterranean. As a result of these interactions, Akkadian culture and material goods were traded, and Akkadian influences can be seen in the art, language, and even governance of these neighboring regions. Sargon's empire was not just a military conquest, it was also a cultural exchange that affected much of the ancient world. Trade routes and the spread of Akkadian culture. The Akkadian Empire controlled vital trade routes that connected Mesopotamia to Anatolia, the Indus Valley, and the Levant. These routes were crucial for the empire's prosperity, as they allowed for the exchange of goods and cultural ideas. Economic exchange. Through these trade routes, the Akkadians traded grain, wheat, barley, and metal tools with neighboring civilizations. In return, they received timber from the mountains, copper from the Levant, and precious stones from Anatolia. Trade made the Akkadian Empire a powerful economic force in the ancient world, and it helped spread Akkadian culture across Mesopotamia and beyond. Cultural spread. As goods traveled along these trade routes, so did ideas. The Akkadians spread their religious practices, art, and literature to surrounding regions. The Akkadian language became the language of diplomacy, and the cuneiform script was adopted in neighboring lands. The decline of the Akkadian Empire, environmental challenges and invasions that led to the fall of the Akkadian Empire. The Akkadian Empire's decline was not caused by a single factor. It was the result of a combination of environmental, political, and military issues that eventually led to its collapse. Environmental collapse. The Akkadian Empire's reliance on irrigation began to have negative consequences. Over time, the overuse of water for crops led to the salinization of soil. As the soil became more saline, agricultural yields began to drop. This environmental crisis caused widespread famine, and food shortages destabilized the empire. The famine weakened the empire's internal stability and caused massive discontent among the population. Rebellions and internal strife. The Akkadian Empire, which had once been unified under Sargon's rule, began to face internal strife. As the empire grew larger, it became harder for the central government to maintain control. Local rulers began to assert more autonomy, and rebellions broke out in several provinces. The central authority was weakened, and the empire became fragmented. Invasions by the Gutians. The final blow to the Akkadian Empire came in the form of invasions by the Gutians, a group of mountain people from the Zagros Mountains. The Gutians took advantage of the empire's weakened state and launched attacks on the Akkadian heartland. The Akkadian Empire, already weakened by internal problems and environmental collapse, couldn't defend itself effectively. By 2150 BCE, the empire had fallen, and the Gutians ruled much of Mesopotamia. Although the Akkadian Empire fell, its influence lasted for centuries. The Akkadian language, cuneiform script, and military innovations continued to shape the Babylonian Empire and other empires that followed. Sargon's reign marked a turning point in the history of the ancient world. His creation of the First Empire and his ability to unite disparate regions under a single rule set the stage for the rise of future empires in Mesopotamia and beyond. As we continue, we will explore how the fall of the Akkadian Empire led to the rise of the Babylonian Empire and the eventual spread of Mesopotamian culture across the ancient world. The rise of Babylon, circa 1900 BCE. Babylon's strategic importance and the reign of King Hammurabi. To understand the significance of Babylon in ancient history, we must first recognize the geographical and political factors that played a key role in its rise. Situated on the Euphrates River, Babylon was uniquely positioned in the heart of Mesopotamia, at the crossroads of trade routes between the Persian Gulf and Anatolia. This strategic location allowed the city to become a center of commerce, attracting merchants, travelers, and intellectuals from surrounding regions. But Babylon wasn't always the capital of the empire. Before Hammurabi's reign, it was a relatively small city-state that had to compete for resources and power with larger, more established cities like Ur and Nippur. Hammurabi's ascension to the throne wasn't marked by immediate power. It was a gradual rise that relied on military strategy and political alliances. Hammurabi, born in 1792 BCE, inherited the throne of Babylon after his father, Simu-Abi. While Hammurabi's initial focus was on maintaining his father's gains, he quickly realized that in order to secure his legacy, he would need to expand and unite the fragmented regions of Mesopotamia under a single rule. This would set the stage for his reign to transform Babylon into the most powerful city-state in the region. The key to his success lay in his combination of military genius and political diplomacy. Hammurabi's armies were organized into highly efficient fighting units, and his leadership was strengthened by careful diplomatic maneuvers with rival city-states. Early military campaigns led him to conquer several important cities, including Eshnunna and Larsa, both of which held vital trade routes. These victories not only expanded Babylon's borders, but also brought the region's vital resources under Hammurabi's control. However, Hammurabi's success wasn't just due to military might. He understood that true power didn't just come from conquest, but from the ability to govern a unified region. He established administrative centers in key cities and made sure to appoint loyal governors who would oversee these regions and enforce Babylonian law. Hammurabi's reign was not only about warfare, it was about creating an empire with a well-organized government, a solid foundation for trade, and clear legal frameworks. Hammurabi's Code, the world's first written legal code, and its significance. The creation and importance of Hammurabi's Code. The most enduring legacy of Hammurabi's reign is undoubtedly his Code of Laws, which stands as one of the world's first written legal systems. Before Hammurabi, laws in the ancient world were often unwritten or passed down orally, making it difficult for the average citizen to understand or uphold justice. Hammurabi's Code was a revolutionary step forward because it standardized justice, ensuring that every citizen, whether a noble or commoner, was held to the same legal standards. The Code of Hammurabi was inscribed on a large stone stele, a stone pillar, which was placed in a public space for all to see. The laws covered every aspect of life, from family relations to property rights, slavery, business transactions, and even religion. This marked a major shift from earlier systems, where laws were often enforced by arbitrary decisions made by local rulers or priests. Hammurabi's Code was based on the idea of retributive justice, often referred to as the principle of an eye for an eye. However, this wasn't as straightforward as it seems. For instance, if a person injured someone, the punishment could involve compensation, such as paying for the medical expenses or an equal injury, but it wasn't always the same for everyone. Social class played a crucial role in the application of these laws. The punishment for a noble committing a crime would often be more lenient than the punishment for a slave. Key themes in the Code of Hammurabi included family law. Hammurabi's Code contained specific provisions regarding marriage, divorce, and inheritance. It was clear that a woman's marital status was heavily regulated, and if a woman's husband divorced her, the wife had to prove her innocence to avoid losing her property. Divorce was permissible, but in many cases, the man had to provide financial compensation or reparations to the woman. Criminal law. Hammurabi's Code also made significant provisions for criminal justice. Theft, for example, had varying degrees of punishment, from compensation to capital punishment for serious offenses. A thief might have to pay back several times the value of stolen goods, and if someone committed burglary at night, the penalty was death. Similarly, bribery and corruption were also severely punished, reflecting Hammurabi's desire for a just society. Commercial law. The code also ensured that business transactions were properly regulated. Merchants were required to meet honest weights and measures, and contracts were strictly enforced. If a merchant sold faulty goods, they were required to refund the customer. While Hammurabi's code was rooted in punitive justice, it also included provisions for fairness and balance in society. Punishments were often intended to restore social order, but they were also meant to deter future crimes and ensure that justice was consistently served. Hammurabi's code's legacy. Hammurabi's code was not just a legal document for the Babylonians, it laid the foundation for modern legal systems. As one of the first written legal systems, it influenced later civilizations such as the Persians, Greeks, and Romans. Elements of Hammurabi's code can be seen in many legal systems today, including the idea of written laws that apply to all people equally. The idea of retributive justice, an eye for an eye, also found its way into many other legal codes, and the importance of property rights and trade regulations became fundamental to the development of future empires. The Babylonian Golden Age. Advances in astronomy, mathematics, and architecture. Under Hammurabi's rule, the Babylonian Empire entered a period of cultural flowering that would be remembered for centuries. Babylon became a center for not only military and political power, but also for scientific achievement and intellectual development. The Babylonian Golden Age was marked by significant advances in fields such as astronomy, mathematics, and architecture. Astronomy. The Babylonians were some of the earliest astronomers, and their understanding of the stars was advanced for their time. They developed an early form of astrology, using the positions of the stars and planets to predict celestial events. They tracked the movement of the planets with precision and developed an understanding of the lunar calendar, which later influenced both the Greeks and Romans. The Babylonians also used their knowledge of the stars to determine the best times for planting crops and predicting seasons, which was critical for the success of their agricultural society. Mathematics. In mathematics, the Babylonians were pioneers in geometry, developing an early system of multiplication, division, and algebra. They also developed a base 60 number system, which is still used today in measuring time, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. This system enabled them to perform complex calculations in both astronomy and engineering, and it laid the groundwork for later mathematical advancements. Architecture. The Babylonian period also saw remarkable architectural achievements. Under Hammurabi, the city of Babylon itself grew into an architectural marvel. Hammurabi constructed the Ishtar Gate, a monumental entrance to the city, which was decorated with glazed bricks featuring images of lions, dragons, and bulls. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, though shrouded in myth, are also often attributed to this period. These gardens, believed to have been created by Nebuchadnezzar II for his wife, were said to be a feat of engineering, using irrigation to bring water to terraces filled with lush greenery. The gardens have become a symbol of Babylonian wealth and ingenuity, though their exact existence is still debated. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, myth versus reality. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, but their existence is shrouded in mystery. Ancient Greek historians like Strabo and Philo of Byzantium describe the gardens as a series of tiered terraces filled with lush vegetation, supposedly built by Nebuchadnezzar II for his wife, Amytis of Media, who longed for the green hills and forests of her homeland. Despite the detailed descriptions in historical texts, no physical evidence of the gardens has been found at Babylon. Some scholars believe the gardens may have been part of a palace complex rather than a separate structure. Others suggest that the gardens might have been misidentified, or that they were a mythical element woven into the history of Babylon. Regardless of whether they existed in the form described by the ancients, the Hanging Gardens symbolize the luxury, ambition, and engineering prowess of the Babylonian Empire. The decline and fall of the Babylonian Empire, internal strife, and the invasion by the Hittites and Assyrians. The decline of the Babylonian Empire was not immediate. Hammurabi's successors continued to rule Babylon for several generations, but the unity of the empire began to weaken. Political infighting, corruption, and a lack of strong leadership created dissatisfaction among the Babylonian people. Rebellions and strife. The empire's size and diversity meant that maintaining control over distant regions was challenging. Regional governors grew more powerful, and some began to act independently, undermining the central government's authority. The noble class and religious leaders also had their own interests, often creating tension with the crown. The Hittites and Assyrians. As Babylon weakened, it became a target for invasions from the Hittites and Assyrians. The Hittites, who were expanding their empire to the west, invaded Babylon in the 16th century BCE, weakening its position in the region. The Assyrians, who were emerging as a dominant force in the north, also posed a serious threat to Babylon's survival. In 1595 BCE, the Hittites sacked Babylon, marking the beginning of the empire's decline. The final blow came with the rise of the Assyrian Empire, which conquered much of Babylon's territory. By the 8th century BCE, Babylon was under the control of the Assyrians, and although the city would eventually be rebuilt, the golden age of the Babylonian Empire had passed. The Babylonian Empire, under Hammurabi, stands as one of the greatest civilizations of the ancient world. Its rise to power, marked by military conquest, administrative genius, and intellectual achievement, established it as the center of Mesopotamian and Near Eastern culture. Hammurabi's code of laws, astronomical advancements, and architectural marvels remain lasting contributions to world history. However, as with many great empires, the Babylonian Empire's decline came as a result of both internal and external forces. Civil wars, political instability, and the rise of foreign empires ultimately led to the fall of Babylon as a major power. Despite its decline, the Babylonian legacy lived on in the cultures that followed, and its influence can still be seen in modern legal systems, astronomy, and architecture. The story of the Babylonian Empire is a tale of rise and fall, of human ambition and the quest for power, offering timeless lessons in governance, law, and cultural achievement. The Assyrian Empire, conquerors and builders. The rise of Assyria, Assyria's military strategies and technological innovations. The Assyrian Empire is often considered one of the most militarily advanced civilizations of the ancient world, and it is clear why. Their strategic military decisions and innovative technologies played a crucial role in its rise to power. Their expertise in warfare and technological advancement made them feared and respected by neighboring empires, and their innovations set the standard for many armies to come. However, the Assyrians didn't just win battles, they mastered the art of war, making their military unstoppable. Iron weapons and armor. The evolution of war. One of the key factors behind Assyrian military dominance was the use of iron. Assyria was one of the first civilizations to adopt iron as a primary material for weapons and armor, which revolutionized their military strength. While their neighbors were still using bronze, which was heavier and less durable, the Assyrians made iron swords, spears, and armor that were much more resistant to wear and stronger in combat. Iron was not only better than bronze in terms of strength, it was also cheaper and more widely available. The Assyrians were able to mass-produce iron weapons, enabling them to outfit a massive army with the best technology available at the time. This newfound advantage gave Assyria the ability to sustain prolonged military campaigns. Their iron-tipped arrows and swords could pierce the armor of their enemies, leaving them at a significant advantage. Chariot warfare, power and mobility. The Assyrian army perfected the use of chariots, which had previously been used by other civilizations, but were not as integrated into battle tactics. Assyrian chariots were not mere transportation tools. They were highly specialized military machines used to break enemy lines, engage in flanking tactics, and carry archers and spear throwers into the heart of the battle. The Assyrian chariot was equipped with spiked wheels to tear through infantry, while soldiers aboard could unleash barrage after barrage of arrows to harass the enemy. The mobility of chariots allowed the Assyrian military to hit its enemies hard and fast, overwhelming them with speed and force before they had time to mount an organized defense. Not only were Assyrian chariots effective in battle, but they were also used in psychological warfare. The sight of these heavily armored and mobile units striking from all directions instilled terror in their enemies, who often surrendered or fled before a fight even began. Siege warfare and psychological tactics, breaking the will of the enemy. One of the Assyrians' most feared strategies was their mastery of siege warfare. Rather than simply surrounding enemy cities and waiting them out, the Assyrians would directly assault them with terrifying military technology and psychological warfare. The Assyrians used siege towers to scale the walls of cities and battering rams to break down their gates. These innovations allowed them to breach fortified cities with alarming speed, making them unstoppable in siege situations. What truly set the Assyrians apart, however, was their use of terror as a weapon. In their conquests, they would often destroy everything in their path, burning crops, leveling cities, and killing or deporting populations. Assyrian kings like Tiglath-Pileser III would often send messages to their enemies, warning them of the devastation that awaited them should they resist. This terrifying reputation meant that many cities surrendered without a fight simply to avoid the horrors of Assyrian conquest. The Assyrians were known to deport entire populations, resettling them across the empire to prevent rebellions and maintain order. The expansion of the Assyrian Empire under key rulers. The expansion of the Assyrian Empire under its greatest rulers was not simply a result of superior technology and military strategy, but also due to the vision and brilliance of its kings. Leaders like Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, and Ashurbanipal were central to the empire's rise, each contributing to the empire's military dominance and cultural influence. Tiglath-Pileser III, 745–727 BCE. The architect of Empire I of the first great Assyrian kings, Tiglath-Pileser III, is often credited with laying the foundation of the Assyrian Empire as we know it. Although Assyria had been a powerful kingdom before, Tiglath-Pileser's reign marked the beginning of its true imperial expansion. He reformed the military, making it more efficient and organized, which helped Assyria conquer and hold vast territories. Tiglath-Pileser's use of military tactics like deportation, siege warfare, and the formation of alliances with smaller kingdoms helped Assyria dominate much of the Near East. His empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia and Syria, positioning Assyria as the dominant force in the region. Tiglath-Pileser's greatest achievement was his ability to maintain control over diverse and often rebellious populations through administrative reforms. He established a system of vassal kings and provincial governors to ensure loyalty and reduce the likelihood of rebellion. Sargon II, 721–705 BCE. The conqueror of Israel and the builder of Nineveh. The reign of Sargon II is particularly notable for his conquest of Israel and the exile of the 10 tribes in 722 BCE, a pivotal event in the history of the region. By defeating the kingdom of Israel and capturing Samaria, Sargon not only expanded the Assyrian Empire, but also severely disrupted the historical fabric of the Jewish people. Sargon X was also a great builder and administrator, most notably constructing the city of Dur-Sharrukin, modern-day Khorsabad, to serve as the new capital of Assyria. The city was a monumental feat of engineering, filled with palaces, temples, and monuments that glorified the king's power and military achievements. Sargon's reign also saw the continued fortification of Assyrian cities, particularly Nineveh, which would later become the empire's cultural capital. Ashurbanipal, 668–627 BCE. The Scholar King. Perhaps the most famous Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal, was both a warrior and a patron of the arts. He expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent, securing the Babylonian region and extending Assyria's influence into Egypt and the Levant. Ashurbanipal was also deeply interested in literature and learning. He commissioned the construction of the famous royal library at Nineveh, which housed thousands of cuneiform tablets and scrolls containing historical records, religious texts, and scientific treatises. This library became one of the greatest repositories of knowledge in the ancient world, preserving the cultural heritage of the region for future generations. Assyrian culture and architecture. The creation of vast libraries. Ashurbanipal's library was not just a collection of books, it was a symbol of the Assyrian commitment to knowledge and learning. Located in the capital city of Nineveh, the library contained some of the oldest written texts known to humanity, many of which are still studied by scholars today. Among its most famous works were the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, and a wide range of mathematical and scientific writings. Ashurbanipal's interest in preserving knowledge wasn't just about collecting texts, it was about maintaining continuity in the empire. The library at Nineveh allowed future generations to access the wisdom and learning of their predecessors, which in turn helped preserve the legacy of Mesopotamian culture. Advances in art and monumental architecture, palaces, bas-reliefs. The Assyrian Empire is also known for its extraordinary achievements in art and architecture. Palaces and monuments were not only works of art, but also served as tools for political propaganda. Palaces. The most famous Assyrian palace was the palace of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, which was adorned with incredible bas-reliefs depicting the king's military victories, divine favor, and hunting prowess. These images told the story of Ashurbanipal's reign, serving as a constant reminder of his power and divine right to rule. Bas-reliefs. Assyrian bas-reliefs were highly detailed and often depicted violent and dramatic scenes from battle, emphasizing the king's strength and courage. The lion hunt of Ashurbanipal, for instance, is one of the most famous bas-reliefs, showing the king hunting lions with his bow. These images were not just art, they were propaganda, reinforcing the idea that the king was a warrior, protector, and divinely chosen ruler. The fall of the Assyrian Empire, internal dissent, military overextension, and the coalition of Babylonians and Medes that led to Assyria's downfall. While the Assyrian Empire reached great heights under kings like Ashurbanipal, the empire's decline came about due to internal struggles, military overextension, and the growing power of external enemies. Internal dissent. By the 7th century BCE, the Assyrian Empire had grown vast and unwieldy. Its administration became increasingly difficult to manage, and regional governors began to act more independently. The Assyrians, who had once been feared for their military discipline, faced growing unrest among their subject populations. Rebellions broke out in Babylon, Elam, and other territories, and the empire's once unified front began to crack. Military overextension. Assyria's ambition led to its eventual downfall. The empire stretched too far and required a massive military force to maintain control. As the Assyrian army fought on multiple fronts, in Egypt, Anatolia, Syria, and Babylonia, it began to lose its strategic strength. The Assyrian army was spread thin, and it became increasingly difficult to maintain supply lines, recruitment, and morale. The coalition of Babylonians and Medes. The final blow came when a coalition of Babylonians and Medes, led by the Babylonian king Nabopolassar and the Median king Cyaxares, laid siege to Nineveh in 612 BCE. After months of intense fighting, the city fell. The Babylonian-Median alliance defeated the Assyrians, marking the end of their empire. Aftermath. With the fall of Nineveh, the Assyrian Empire crumbled. Assyria's territories were divided between the Medes and Babylonians, and Babylon became the dominant power in the region. Assyria's cultural influence continued to linger, but its once great empire was lost. The Assyrian Empire was a remarkable civilization that combined military might, technological innovation, and cultural richness to build one of the most powerful empires in the ancient world. From its early military victories to its innovations in warfare, the Assyrians were pioneers in many areas. The kings of Assyria, like Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, and Ashurbanipal, expanded the empire's borders, solidified its place as the dominant force in the ancient Near East, and left behind a legacy of art, architecture, and learning. Yet, despite its strength, the Assyrian Empire eventually succumbed to the same forces that had allowed it to flourish: military overextension, internal dissent, and the rise of powerful external enemies. However, the legacy of the Assyrians, especially their contributions to military tactics, art, and literature, lives on. Neo-Babylonian and Persian influence. Neo-Babylonian Empire, 626 to 539 BCE. Nebuchadnezzar II's reign. The rebuilding of Babylon, the Ishtar Gate, and the Tower of Babel. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, often called the Chaldean Empire, rose to prominence under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, one of the most influential rulers of the ancient Near East. His military, political, and cultural achievements played a pivotal role in shaping the future of the ancient world. Nebuchadnezzar II, the son of Nabopolassar, ascended to the throne in 605 BCE and began his reign by consolidating power in the region. He is most well known for the military expansion of Babylon, the massive building projects he initiated, and his role in the Babylonian exile, which led to the destruction of Jerusalem and the forced migration of the Jewish people to Babylon. The rebuilding of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar's reign is most famously remembered for the rebuilding of Babylon into one of the most magnificent cities in the ancient world. The city of Babylon had existed for centuries, but had fallen into decay. Nebuchadnezzar transformed it into an architectural wonder, with imposing walls, grand gates, and palatial structures. The walls of Babylon were particularly remarkable, standing over 300 feet high and 80 feet thick, enough to protect the city from the forces that might try to breach it. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was a city of monumental gates and fortifications, most notably the Ishtar Gate. This gateway, constructed with blue-glazed bricks and adorned with images of lions, dragons, and bulls, symbolized the power of the Babylonian Empire and the favor of the gods. The Ishtar Gate led into the processional way, a ceremonial road lined with animal imagery and leading to the heart of the city. Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, was a central figure in Nebuchadnezzar's worship. He dedicated several structures to her, the Ishtar Gate being the most iconic. The gate was decorated with reliefs of lions, the sacred animal of Ishtar, which emphasized both her protective role and her association with royal authority. The processional way, another achievement of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, was used during religious festivals and allowed for grand ceremonies and rituals to be conducted in front of the people and the gods. The Tower of Babel. Although the Tower of Babel is more commonly associated with the Bible and ancient Mesopotamian myth, many scholars believe that Nebuchadnezzar's grand ziggurat was the inspiration for this story. Ziggurats were massive stepped pyramids, built in ancient Mesopotamian cities that served as temples to the gods. Nebuchadnezzar, seeking to leave his mark on history, likely undertook massive construction projects, including one of the largest ziggurats, possibly in honor of the god Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon. The Tower of Babel in the Bible was described as a tower that reached the heavens, and many scholars believe that Nebuchadnezzar's ziggurat Itamananki could have been the real-life inspiration. Itamananki stood near the temple of Marduk and was considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. The story in the book of Genesis of humans trying to build a tower to reach the heavens only to have God confuse their languages and scatter them may have been influenced by Nebuchadnezzar's grand architectural feats. Nebuchadnezzar's commitment to monumental architecture was more than just a show of wealth. It was a demonstration of the divine favor he claimed for himself. Through these grand projects, he cemented his position as a ruler chosen by the gods and as an architect of a powerful empire. The fall of Jerusalem and the Babylonian exile. One of the most significant events of Nebuchadnezzar's reign was the destruction of Jerusalem and the subsequent Babylonian exile of the Jewish people. The kingdom of Judah, which had been a vassal of Babylon, attempted to rebel against Nebuchadnezzar's rule in 589 BCE. This rebellion led to the siege of Jerusalem and the eventual destruction of the First Temple by 586 BCE. Siege of Jerusalem. The siege of Jerusalem was not an easy victory for Nebuchadnezzar's forces. The city had been fortified, and the Jewish kingdom had resisted Babylonian rule for some time. The siege lasted for over a year, during which the inhabitants of Jerusalem were subjected to famine and psychological warfare. Finally, the city walls were breached, and the Temple of Solomon, the most sacred site in Judaism, was destroyed. The destruction of Jerusalem marked the end of the First Temple period for the Jews and was seen as a significant religious catastrophe. The Temple's destruction also symbolized the collapse of the Jewish kingdom and their subjugation by a foreign power. Nebuchadnezzar, however, did not just destroy the temple. He plundered its treasures and carried away artifacts and religious symbols to Babylon, including the Ark of the Covenant, according to some traditions. The Babylonian exile. Nebuchadnezzar did not just destroy Jerusalem. He also deported much of its population, including the elite class of Jews, to Babylon. This forced migration, known as the Babylonian exile, lasted for 70 years and had profound effects on Jewish culture and identity. The Jews were taken to Babylon as prisoners of war, and it was during this time that the Jews began to compile their religious texts and preserve their traditions. The exile became a defining moment in Jewish history, as it marked the loss of their homeland and the creation of the Jewish diaspora, a scattered community living in different regions. The exile shaped the identity of the Jewish people, and the memories of their time in Babylon would influence their future interactions with empires, including the Persians. Cultural achievements of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The Neo-Babylonian Empire was not just a military power, but also a center of culture, learning, and art. The reign of Nebuchadnezzar II is marked by tremendous contributions in astronomy, mathematics, and architecture. Contributions to astronomy. The Babylonians were pioneers in the field of astronomy, particularly in their ability to track the movement of the stars and planets. Nebuchadnezzar's reign saw an explosion of knowledge about the night sky, and Babylon became a center for the study of the heavens. Babylonian astronomers developed the first known lunar calendar, based on the phases of the moon. Babylonians were also among the first to recognize the periodicity of celestial events like eclipses and to record these events in great detail. They were able to predict solar and lunar eclipses with a high degree of accuracy, which helped them guide their agricultural practices and religious rituals. The Babylonians also studied the planets and believed that the movements of the planets were closely tied to human affairs, influencing their astrological beliefs. Their system of astrology would later be passed on to the Greeks and influence Western astronomy for centuries. Mathematics. The Neo-Babylonians developed a base 60 number system, which continues to influence modern life today. This sexagesimal system, based on 60, is why we still measure time in 60 seconds per minute and 60 minutes per hour. The Babylonians were skilled in geometry and algebra, creating methods for calculating area, volume, and other geometric properties. Babylonian mathematicians also devised the first multiplication tables and methods for solving quadratic equations. Their mathematical knowledge laid the groundwork for later developments in Greek and Islamic mathematics. The Persian conquest, Cyrus the Great's conquest of Babylon, and the end of Mesopotamian dominance. In 539 BCE, the Persian king Cyrus the Great captured Babylon, marking the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire and the beginning of Persian dominance in the ancient Near East. The fall of Babylon was not marked by bloodshed. Instead, Cyrus's forces entered the city with relatively little resistance, as many of the Babylonian citizens welcomed the Persians as liberators from the tyrannical rule of Nabonidus, the last Babylonian king. The conquest of Babylon. The Persian conquest of Babylon was facilitated by a disgruntled population who were unhappy under Nabonidus's rule. The Babylonians had grown disillusioned with their king, who had spent much of his reign in Arabia neglecting his people. His son, Belshazzar, was left in charge in Babylon, and his ineffective leadership led to widespread unrest. In contrast, Cyrus the Great was seen as a benevolent conqueror, and his military genius allowed him to take the city with minimal bloodshed. He famously allowed the Jewish exiles in Babylon to return to their homeland in Judah and rebuild the Temple of Solomon, a key event in Jewish history. The shift from Mesopotamian culture to Persian influence. With the fall of Babylon, Persian culture began to replace Mesopotamian cultural dominance. Cyrus and his successors, including Darius I and Xerxes I, brought Persian governance to the regions once ruled by the Babylonians. The Persians, however, did not erase the Babylonian legacy. They adopted many aspects of Babylonian culture, such as the Babylonian calendar, cuneiform script, and astronomy. Under Persian rule, Mesopotamian culture persisted, but it was now seen through a Persian lens. Persian rulers continued to support Babylonian religious traditions while also asserting their own identity as divinely chosen rulers. The Persian Empire was far more decentralized than Babylon's empire, allowing for greater local autonomy while maintaining Persian control at the top. The end of Mesopotamian civilization. How Mesopotamian cultural and scientific legacies influenced later civilizations, Greeks, Romans, and beyond. While the fall of the Neo-Babylonian Empire marked the end of Mesopotamian dominance in the region, the legacy of Mesopotamian civilization lived on. The Persian conquest ushered in a new era, but the cultural, scientific, and intellectual achievements of Babylon, Sumer, and Assyria influenced later civilizations, especially the Greeks, Romans, and Islamic scholars. Greek influence. Greek scholars, particularly those in the Hellenistic period, were greatly influenced by Mesopotamian science and astronomy. Alexander the Great, who conquered the Persian Empire, inherited much of the Mesopotamian knowledge that had been preserved in Babylonian archives and Persian libraries. The Greeks adopted many Babylonian astronomical methods and mathematical principles, which laid the groundwork for the development of Western science. Roman influence. The Romans, who came after the Greeks, also inherited Mesopotamian culture. Roman engineering, particularly in the use of arches and domes, was influenced by the Babylonian and Assyrian architectural traditions. Roman law and military tactics also bear the marks of earlier Mesopotamian governance and military innovations. Islamic influence. During the Islamic Golden Age, scholars in the Abbasid Caliphate made extensive use of Babylonian and Persian scientific knowledge. Astronomy, mathematics, and medicine were fields where Mesopotamian innovations played a key role in shaping the knowledge that would later reach Europe during the Renaissance. The scientific, mathematical, and philosophical achievements of Mesopotamia, whether in the form of astronomy, law, or literature, had an enduring impact on the cultures that followed, influencing not just the Greeks and Romans, but also Islamic scholars and future civilizations. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, under Nebuchadnezzar II, stands as one of the greatest civilizations of the ancient world, remembered for its monumental achievements in art, astronomy, architecture, and military might. The Persian conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE marked the end of Mesopotamian dominance, but the cultural and scientific legacies of Mesopotamian civilization lived on, shaping the development of later civilizations in the Greeks, Romans, and the Islamic world. The Babylonian exile, the rebuilding of Babylon, and the Persian conquest marked critical junctures in the history of the ancient Near East, and their legacies continue to influence modern scientific and cultural thought to this day. Legacy and influence of Mesopotamian civilization. Cultural contributions to the world. Impact on writing, law, literature, and governance. One of the most profound legacies of Mesopotamian civilization is its contribution to writing, law, literature, and governance. These developments set the foundation for the progressive societies that followed and continue to influence modern life. Writing. The invention of writing is perhaps Mesopotamia's greatest contribution to human civilization. The Sumerians are credited with the creation of cuneiform, one of the world's earliest systems of writing, around 3200 BCE. Originally developed for recording economic transactions, such as grain storage, cuneiform evolved into a more sophisticated system for writing literature, legal codes, scientific texts, and historical records. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest epic poems in human history, was recorded in cuneiform on clay tablets. The Sumerians, followed by the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, contributed to the preservation of knowledge through written records, making written communication a lasting institution. The use of writing for administrative, religious, and educational purposes established a culture of knowledge sharing that influenced ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Law. The Code of Hammurabi, created around 1754 BCE by the Babylonian king Hammurabi, is another monumental contribution to governance and law. This code is one of the earliest and most comprehensive written legal systems in history, influencing later legal codes across the ancient world. It introduced concepts such as eye for an eye, retributive justice, and provided a written record of laws that applied to all citizens, regardless of social status. The concept of codified law spread to other ancient civilizations. The Greeks and Romans adopted the idea of written laws as a way to promote justice and order in their societies. The Code of Hammurabi inspired subsequent legal thinkers and systems, including those found in Western and Middle Eastern legal traditions. Literature. Mesopotamia also made significant contributions to literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not only an important piece of ancient literature, but also a reflection of human concerns, such as the quest for immortality, the relationship between humans and gods, and the heroic journey. This epic continues to influence literary traditions in the Western world. Other Mesopotamian literary works, including the Enuma Elish, Babylonian creation myth, the Epic of Atrahasis, and the Lamentations found in Assyrian and Babylonian texts, shaped the narrative structures and themes in later literature, both in the Near East and in the West. Governance. The concept of bureaucratic administration that Mesopotamia pioneered with its city-states and empires had a lasting effect on governance systems across the ancient world. The Sumerians and later the Babylonians and Assyrians organized their societies into highly efficient governmental structures, including taxation, law enforcement, and public works. These early systems of centralized governance were adopted by the Persians, Greeks, and Romans, helping shape the way empires were governed for centuries. Mesopotamia's establishment of law codes, the creation of standing armies, and the administrative divisions of land laid the foundation for later statecraft. Mesopotamian influence on other ancient cultures. The influence of Mesopotamian civilization spread far beyond its borders, impacting the development of other ancient civilizations such as Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Egypt, the Egyptian civilization, which arose along the Nile River, was deeply influenced by the achievements of Mesopotamia. Both societies were among the first to develop writing systems, and though their scripts were different, Egyptians used hieroglyphs, the basic concept of written communication and record-keeping came from Mesopotamia. The Babylonian, Assyrian, and Sumerian influences on governance, legal structures, and economic organization found their way into the Egyptian administrative system. Egypt's monumental architecture, particularly its pyramids and temples, reflects the influence of earlier Mesopotamian ziggurats. The idea of divine kingship and the ruler as a representative of the gods, a concept pioneered in Mesopotamia, was later mirrored in Egypt's pharaohs. Greece. The Greeks were deeply influenced by the cultural and intellectual traditions of Mesopotamia. Greek philosophy owes much to Mesopotamian intellectual achievements, particularly in astronomy, mathematics, and literature. The Babylonian system of astronomy was foundational for Greek astronomers like Hipparchus and Ptolemy. The Zoroastrian influence of Persian beliefs, which were influenced by Mesopotamian religion, also impacted Greek philosophical thought, especially on the concepts of good and evil. Greek historians such as Herodotus recorded the Babylonian Empire as a vital part of their understanding of world history, acknowledging the military genius of Babylonian kings like Nebuchadnezzar II. Rome. The Romans inherited many of their military and administrative practices from the Assyrians and Babylonians, especially in their use of written laws, taxation, and bureaucratic governance. The Romans adopted the practice of building roads and fortifications based on Assyrian and Babylonian engineering innovations, which allowed their empire to expand and maintain control over vast territories. Furthermore, Roman architecture, particularly the use of the arch and vaulted ceilings, had roots in Mesopotamian techniques. The Roman legal system was influenced by the Code of Hammurabi, and the concept of public administration was rooted in the early Babylonian systems. The rediscovery of Mesopotamian civilization. Archaeological excavations of Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria in the 19th and 20th centuries. The rediscovery of Mesopotamian civilization began in the 19th century when archaeological excavations uncovered the remains of ancient cities such as Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria. These excavations have been instrumental in our understanding of the ancient world and have provided scholars with a wealth of information about the social structures, religions, and everyday life of Mesopotamian peoples. Sumer. The ancient city of Ur, one of the first great cities of Sumer, was uncovered by Sir Leonard Woolley in the 1920s. Woolley's excavations revealed royal tombs filled with treasures and artifacts that illuminated the importance of religion, art, and trade in Sumerian society. Excavations at Ur also uncovered clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform writing, giving historians insight into the Sumerian language and administrative practices. Babylon. The most famous excavations at Babylon were conducted by the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Koldewey's team uncovered the Ishtar Gate and the Processional Way, two of Babylon's most iconic architectural achievements. They also unearthed the remains of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, giving us a glimpse into the grandeur of his reign and the splendor of ancient Babylon. Assyria. The ruins of Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, were discovered by Austin Henry Layard in the 1840s. Layard's excavations uncovered an extensive array of Assyrian bas-reliefs, including scenes of war and royal propaganda, as well as the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal. These discoveries provided scholars with some of the first direct evidence of Assyrian culture, religion, and military strategies. The discoveries made in these ancient cities helped to confirm the historical accuracy of many biblical accounts, such as the Babylonian exile, and allowed historians to better understand the political, cultural, and religious practices of the Mesopotamians. Important artifacts and what they reveal about ancient Mesopotamian society. Many of the artifacts discovered in Mesopotamia have been crucial in understanding the society and culture of these ancient peoples. Some of the most important findings include the Code of Hammurabi, discovered at Susa in 1901. The stele containing the Code of Hammurabi is one of the most important legal documents from the ancient world. It reveals not only the legal practices of Babylon, but also the social hierarchy, punishments, and values of Babylonian society. The Epic of Gilgamesh. The discovery of the Epic of Gilgamesh in the library of Ashurbanipal is perhaps the most significant literary find of the 19th century. The epic has provided scholars with profound insights into the spiritual beliefs and philosophical concerns of the Sumerians and Babylonians. It addresses themes of friendship, mortality, and the search for immortality, all of which continue to resonate in modern literature. Mesopotamia in modern culture. Depictions in literature, films, and video games. The influence of Mesopotamian civilization continues to permeate modern culture, particularly through its portrayal in literature, films, and video games. Literature. Mesopotamia has influenced some of the greatest literary works in history. For example, J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth owes much to the epic traditions of the Sumerians and Babylonians, particularly in his creation of a detailed, mythic past for his fictional world. The Epic of Gilgamesh has been cited as a major inspiration for Tolkien's work, especially the themes of heroism, friendship, and the search for meaning. Films like The Epic of Gilgamesh, 2000, and 300, which is heavily inspired by the Persian Wars, continue to draw upon the legends and mythologies of Mesopotamia. The Babylonian exile also finds its way into many religious and historical films, showcasing the deep cultural significance of the ancient world in modern storytelling. Video games. Mesopotamian civilizations have also found their way into video games like Assassin's Creed Origins, where players explore an ancient Egypt that has close ties with Mesopotamian traditions. Other games, such as Civilization VI, allow players to manage ancient cities based on real-world civilizations like Sumer and Babylon, incorporating Mesopotamian culture and military tactics into gameplay. Mesopotamia's legacy is profound and enduring. From its contribution to writing, law, and literature, to its influence on the ancient world through the Persians, Greeks, and Romans, Mesopotamian civilization continues to shape the modern world in ways we often take for granted. The rediscovery of its cities and artifacts in the 19th and 20th centuries has allowed us to piece together the rich cultural heritage of this ancient civilization, which laid the foundations for much of what we know about writing, governance, and art today. In modern culture, Mesopotamian civilization lives on through its influence on literature, films, and video games, reminding us of the timeless impact of the world's first cities and their profound contributions to humanity. Myths and legends of Mesopotamia. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Analysis of this foundational literary work and its themes of immortality, friendship, and the meaning of life. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the most significant literary works from ancient Mesopotamia, and arguably the earliest surviving epic poem in human history. This Sumerian Babylonian text was written in cuneiform on clay tablets, dating back to the 18th century BCE, though it contains even older traditions passed down orally for centuries before it was transcribed. The story follows Gilgamesh, the semi-divine king of Uruk, who embarks on a journey in search of immortality after the death of his beloved friend Enkidu. The Epic of Gilgamesh is filled with deep philosophical themes that resonate with the human condition. At the heart of the epic is the struggle for immortality, a theme that has captivated humankind for millennia. Immortality. The quest for immortality is the driving force of Gilgamesh's actions. After the death of Enkidu, his closest companion, Gilgamesh becomes obsessed with the idea of never dying. His search leads him to Utnapishtim, the immortal man who survived a great flood, echoing the flood myth in later Judeo-Christian traditions. Gilgamesh seeks the secret of eternal life from Utnapishtim, who tells him that immortality is not granted to humans and that death is inevitable for all people. The poem underscores the transitory nature of life, with Gilgamesh learning that humans must accept mortality and find meaning in their limited time on Earth. This theme aligns with Mesopotamian views on the gods and their control over fate, and the recognition that humans can never transcend their human limitations. However, rather than end with despair, the epic concludes with a positive message. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, accepting his own mortality and realizing that humanity's legacy lives on through the cities they build, the names they leave behind, and the lives they touch. The immortal city of Uruk becomes his enduring legacy, representing the idea that immortality can be achieved not through eternal life, but through acts of greatness that endure long after death. Friendship. Another significant theme of the Epic of Gilgamesh is the friendship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu. The two are initially polar opposites. Gilgamesh is a tyrant king, while Enkidu is a wild man living with the animals. However, their bond deepens as they undertake heroic deeds together, including the defeat of the Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest, and the killing of the bull of heaven, sent by the goddess Ishtar. The relationship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu reflects the transformative power of true friendship. Enkidu's death forces Gilgamesh to face the emptiness of his existence and drives him to seek meaning beyond conquest and self-indulgence. The meaning of life. Ultimately, the Epic of Gilgamesh offers profound insights into the nature of existence. It addresses the universal struggle with questions of life and death, and what it means to live a meaningful life. Through Gilgamesh's journey, we see that wisdom and self-knowledge come with the realization that life is finite, and the key to fulfillment lies in creating a lasting legacy through actions that benefit others. In this sense, the Epic of Gilgamesh is not just a heroic tale, but a philosophical exploration of human existence, with messages about friendship, love, loss, and the acceptance of the inevitable. Other notable myths: the creation myth and the Enuma Elish. The Enuma Elish, often called the Babylonian creation myth, is one of the oldest and most significant creation narratives in Mesopotamian literature. The title Enuma Elish translates to "when on high," the first words of the text, which describes the birth of the gods and the creation of the world. The beginning of the cosmos. The myth begins with the primordial waters, Apsu, the fresh water, and Tiamat, the salt water, and the birth of the gods from these waters. According to the Enuma Elish, the early gods lived in harmony, but eventually Apsu grew weary of the younger gods' noise and decided to destroy them. Tiamat, initially reluctant, eventually joined forces with Apsu. However, Ea, one of the younger gods, killed Apsu in his sleep and then took control of his domain. The conflict between the gods and Tiamat represents the struggle between order and chaos, with Tiamat embodying the forces of disorder and destruction. The epic culminates in a battle between Marduk, the hero god, and Tiamat, in which Marduk defeats Tiamat, cutting her in half to create the heavens and the earth. Creation of humanity. After Marduk's victory, the gods decide to create humanity to serve the gods, and humans are fashioned from the blood of Chingu, Tiamat's consort. Humanity in the Enuma Elish is seen as a servant race, created to maintain the order of the gods and offer sacrifices. This reflects the Mesopotamian view of the gods as supreme rulers who require human service and devotion. The role of Marduk. Marduk, the hero god, becomes the central figure in the Babylonian religion. He is worshipped as the supreme god, and his victory over chaos symbolizes the divine establishment of order in the universe. This idea of cosmic order through the conquest of chaos is a recurring theme in Mesopotamian myths and greatly influenced later religious traditions. The Enuma Elish also had a political element. Babylon's rise to dominance in the ancient Near East was symbolically tied to the supremacy of Marduk. By establishing Marduk as the king of the gods, Babylon asserted its political power and cultural dominance over other Mesopotamian city-states. Stories of the gods and their interaction with humanity. Mesopotamian mythology is filled with stories of gods interacting with humanity, often in ways that reflect the gods' personalities, desires, and temperaments. These gods were capricious, often displaying both generosity and wrath, and their interactions with humans were seen as both blessings and curses. The goddess Ishtar. One of the most notable deities in Mesopotamian mythology is Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, and fertility. She is a complex character, capable of both great compassion and destructive fury. In one of her most famous myths, Ishtar's descent to the underworld, she journeys to the realm of the dead to visit her sister Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld. In the process, she is stripped of her powers and trapped in the underworld, only to be released when the gods intervene. This story reflects Ishtar's dual nature, representing both the life-giving forces of fertility and the destructive forces of war. The story of Atrahasis. Another important myth is the Atrahasis epic, which recounts a great flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity. This myth, which shares many similarities with the biblical flood narrative, tells of how the gods, angered by the noise and disorder caused by humans, decided to send a flood to wipe them out. However, Atrahasis, a wise and pious man, is warned by the god Enki and is instructed to build an ark to save himself, his family, and the animals. The flood myth in Mesopotamian tradition emphasizes the gods' control over the world's fate and humanity's place in the cosmos. Mythology's influence on later religious and literary traditions. How Mesopotamian myths influenced later religions and epic stories. Mesopotamian mythology had a profound influence on later religious traditions and literary works across cultures, particularly in the Near East and beyond. The Bible, Mesopotamian myths, particularly the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis epic, had a profound influence on the development of biblical stories. The flood narrative found in the book of Genesis shares many similarities with the Mesopotamian flood myths, particularly the Atrahasis and epic of Gilgamesh. The idea of divine judgment and the notion of a chosen survivor, Noah in the Bible, Atrahasis in the Mesopotamian myths, reflects Mesopotamian influences. Moreover, the concept of creation from chaos and the notion of divine kingship are present in the Bible and have roots in Mesopotamian religious thought. Marduk's victory over Tiamat and the establishment of cosmic order mirrors the biblical creation story in Genesis, where God brings order out of chaos. Homeric epics. The Greek epics, particularly Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, also owe much to Mesopotamian influence, particularly in their depictions of gods interacting with humans. The gods in Homer's epics resemble the Mesopotamian deities with their human-like traits, love, jealousy, and wrath, as well as their ability to intervene in human affairs. Just like the gods of Mesopotamian mythology, the gods in Homeric literature take an active role in shaping human fate. The heroic qualities of figures like Gilgamesh, whose epic journey explores themes of mortality and immortality, influence the Greek hero's journey and the development of epic literature in the Western tradition. The myths and legends of Mesopotamia are not just ancient tales, they are a profound reflection of human nature, divine intervention, and the search for meaning in life and death. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Enuma Elish, these stories have shaped the religious, literary, and philosophical traditions of later cultures. They continue to resonate with modern audiences, influencing literature, religion, and art to this day. As we look back on the legacy of Mesopotamian mythology, we see a rich tapestry of stories that continue to explore universal themes such as immortality, friendship, sacrifice, and the relationship between gods and humans. These ancient myths not only reveal the worldview of the Mesopotamians, but also offer timeless lessons that continue to inspire people across cultures and generations. The people of Mesopotamia, daily life and social structures. Daily life in Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria. Social hierarchy: kings, priests, merchants, artisans, and slaves. Mesopotamian society was deeply structured, with a rigid social hierarchy that placed individuals into clear classes based on their status, occupation, and wealth. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians all shared similar social structures, although with variations in their specific roles and cultural practices. Kings and nobility. At the top of the social pyramid stood the king, a figure who was both a political leader and a divine representative. Kings were often seen as chosen by the gods and were responsible for maintaining divine favor. The kings were supported by a noble class of priests, administrators, and military leaders who played key roles in managing the state and its territories. In Sumer, kings like Gilgamesh were depicted as semi-divine beings, while in Babylon and Assyria, the king was seen as the defender of the people, tasked with both governing and expanding the empire. Kings were also patrons of religion, overseeing the construction of temples and supporting religious rituals. Priests. The priests held significant power in Mesopotamian society, second only to the kings. They served as the intermediaries between the gods and the people. Priests were responsible for maintaining the temples, conducting rituals, and ensuring the gods' favor for the city-state. They also oversaw the temple economy, which included large-scale agricultural operations, craft production, and trade. In Sumer, temples were central to life, and the priests not only played a religious role, but also managed the distribution of resources. In Babylon and Assyria, the priesthood maintained libraries, where scholars copied religious texts and studied astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. Merchants and traders. As urban centers grew, so did the merchant class. Mesopotamian merchants were involved in both local and long-distance trade, exchanging goods like grain, textiles, timber, and precious metals. Babylon, located on the Euphrates River, became a significant hub for trade, with merchants traveling as far as Persia, India, and Egypt. Trade routes were well established, and caravans of merchants often traveled along the Silk Road and incense routes, bringing back luxury items such as spices, jewels, and exotic animals. Merchants held significant wealth, and their influence was seen in Babylon and Assyria, where they participated in both the economic and political spheres of society. Merchants played an important role in keeping the cities supplied with essential goods, and their wealth made them an important part of the economy. Artisans and craftsmen. Below the merchants were the artisans, the skilled workers who created everything from pottery and textiles to metal tools and jewelry. Artisans were highly valued for their craftsmanship, as their skills were essential for the functioning of daily life. Craftsmen worked in temples, palaces, and markets, often making their goods available for trade. The Sumerians were known for their pottery and metalwork, while the Babylonians excelled in creating fine textiles and stone sculptures. The Assyrians were particularly known for their ivory carvings, weapons, and military gear, which played a significant role in their military conquests. Slaves. At the bottom of the social pyramid were the slaves. Slavery in Mesopotamia was not based on race, but rather on debt, captivity, or punishment for crimes. Slaves were often captured during military campaigns, or they might sell themselves or their children into slavery to pay off debts. Slaves worked in agriculture, construction, and domestic settings, serving the elite or working in temples and palaces. While slaves were often treated harshly, they were sometimes able to earn their freedom or rise to positions of influence, particularly if they worked in specialized fields like scribing or craftsmanship. Family roles and gender relations in Mesopotamian society. Mesopotamian society had defined gender roles and family structures, with clear expectations for men and women based on their social status and class. Men's roles. In Mesopotamia, men were typically responsible for providing for the family and engaging in public life. They worked as farmers, merchants, soldiers, and craftsmen, and were often involved in the political and religious affairs of the city-state. Male family members held authority over the household, and it was the father or husband who made most decisions. Women's roles. The role of women in Mesopotamian society varied depending on their social class. In elite families, women could be priests, scribes, or involved in temple administration. Royal women, such as the wives of kings, played important political roles and were often patrons of the arts. However, the majority of women's roles were centered around domestic duties, such as managing the household, raising children, and overseeing the production of goods like textiles. Women in Sumer were allowed to own property and participate in trade, but their rights were limited compared to men. Marriage was typically arranged, and women were expected to maintain the family lineage. Women in Babylon had similar roles, but the Babylonian Code of Laws, written by Hammurabi, provided protections for women, particularly in matters of marriage, inheritance, and divorce. In Assyria, women's rights were more restricted, with a strong emphasis on their role as wives and mothers. However, Assyrian queens like Shamuramat wielded significant power, often influencing their husbands' policies or even ruling as regents during the reign of their sons. Work and economy. The importance of agriculture, trade, and craftsmanship in sustaining the civilizations. The Mesopotamian economy was primarily based on agriculture, with irrigation playing a key role in ensuring the success of farming in the Fertile Crescent. Agriculture, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers provided a steady supply of water, allowing for the development of irrigation systems that transformed Mesopotamia into a rich agricultural region. The Mesopotamians developed canals, dams, and water wheels to control the flow of water, ensuring that their crops were watered even during the dry seasons. Crops such as barley, wheat, dates, and lentils were grown in abundance, and the irrigation systems helped increase yields. In addition to crops, livestock such as goats, sheep, and cattle were raised for food, clothing, and other uses. Agriculture was central to the Mesopotamian economy, and the landowners, farmers, and laborers who worked the fields were considered to be the backbone of society. Trade. Mesopotamia's location as a crossroads between Asia, Africa, and the Mediterranean made it a hub for long-distance trade. The Babylonian and Assyrian empires established trade routes to Persia, India, and Egypt, exchanging luxury goods such as spices, timber, and precious metals. Merchants played a crucial role in connecting different regions and ensuring the flow of materials and resources. Markets were established within cities, particularly in the Babylonian capital of Babylon, where merchants traded textiles, pottery, metal goods, and grain. Trade not only provided wealth to the elite, but also helped fuel the growth of Mesopotamian cities. Craftsmanship. The artisan class in Mesopotamia produced a wide range of goods, from pottery to jewelry to weapons. These goods were used domestically and sold in markets, contributing to the economy. Mesopotamian artisans were highly skilled, with some becoming famous for their work. For example, Babylonian silversmiths and Assyrian ivory carvers created intricate items that became highly sought after. Mesopotamian innovations and technologies. Early developments in medicine, engineering, and education. Mesopotamians were highly innovative and practical, developing technologies and systems that would have a lasting impact on the ancient world. Medicine. The Mesopotamians had a rudimentary understanding of medicine, with scribes recording cures for ailments in cuneiform texts. Doctors in Mesopotamia often worked in temples or royal courts and treated diseases with herbs, incantations, and surgical procedures. The Code of Hammurabi also outlined medical fees for doctors and surgeons. Engineering. Mesopotamian engineers were responsible for many innovations in building and construction. The development of the arch and the dome in Assyrian and Babylonian architecture allowed for the construction of large-scale buildings, such as palaces, temples, and city walls. Bricks were a key building material, and the use of mud brick construction in cities like Babylon set the standard for ancient architecture. Education. The Sumerians and later the Babylonians valued education, especially for the elite. Scribal schools, called edubus, taught students how to read and write in cuneiform, an essential skill for administration and trade. Students in these schools were also taught mathematics, astronomy, law, and religious texts, preparing them for government positions and roles in temples. The daily life and social structures of Mesopotamian civilization were deeply influenced by their agricultural success, their religion, and their innovations in technology and government. The social hierarchy was well defined, with kings, priests, merchants, and artisans playing important roles in maintaining the stability and growth of the civilization. Through their trade, craftsmanship, and agriculture, the people of Mesopotamia created a prosperous society that was able to support its architectural wonders, its vast cities, and its lasting influence on later civilizations. Visualizing Mesopotamian life and architecture. Architecture and urban planning. The evolution of cities, from ziggurats to palaces. Mesopotamian architecture was integral to the development of the first urban civilizations. Their cities were not only centers of political power, but also of religion, culture, and trade. Urban planning in Mesopotamia was closely tied to religious beliefs, social hierarchy, and the practical demands of agriculture and commerce. Ziggurats, the temples of the gods. At the heart of most Mesopotamian cities was the ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid with a temple at its summit. The ziggurat was the focal point of each city's spiritual and political life, symbolizing the connection between the earth and the gods. Ziggurats were dedicated to the chief god of the city, such as Marduk in Babylon or Anu in Uruk. They were designed to represent the divine mountain, connecting the heavens and the earth. The Sumerians were the first to build ziggurats, with the ziggurat of Ur being the most famous surviving example. This temple complex stood as a symbol of divine power, and it served as a place of worship, where priests performed daily rituals, including offerings, sacrifices, and prayers to the gods. The height and scale of the ziggurats were designed to project the city's power and to make the gods feel closer to the people. Palaces, the seats of power. As the cities of Mesopotamia grew, palaces began to play a significant role in urban planning. The Assyrians were particularly known for their palatial structures. The palace of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, for example, was one of the largest and most elaborate palaces of the ancient world. These palaces were built to demonstrate royal authority and were often adorned with intricate bas-reliefs depicting the king's victories, religious devotion, and divine protection. In addition to their political function, the palaces were also centers of education, where royal scribes recorded the history and deeds of kings. The palaces often had huge courtyards, gardens, and even libraries, as in the case of Ashurbanipal's library, which contained thousands of cuneiform tablets detailing Babylonian history, science, and religion. The city, as a reflection of power, Mesopotamian cities were often fortified with massive city walls, particularly in the case of Babylon and Nineveh. These walls were designed not only for protection, but also to impress visitors and enemies with the city's wealth and power. The Ishtar Gate of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, was adorned with images of lions, dragons, and gods, and served as the main entrance to the city, displaying the power of Nebuchadnezzar the Sin and his empire. The grid system of urban planning was used in Mesopotamian cities, particularly in Babylon, where streets were arranged in a rectangular grid. This method of urban planning helped organize the city and made it easier for people to navigate. Public spaces such as marketplaces, temples, and city centers were designed to serve the needs of the population and were often aligned with the city's religious and political needs. Reconstruction of ancient sites and the role of modern archaeology. Modern archaeology has played a vital role in reconstructing Mesopotamian cities and helping us understand the architecture, urban planning, and social life of these ancient civilizations. Excavations and discoveries. Archaeologists have uncovered numerous Mesopotamian cities and palaces over the past 2 centuries, shedding light on how the ancient people lived. Some of the most famous excavations include Ur. The excavation of Ur by Sir Leonard Woolley in the 1920s revealed the royal tombs of Ur, which contained incredible artifacts such as gold jewelry, musical instruments, and chariots. Woolley's work also uncovered the ziggurat of Ur, which has been partially reconstructed, allowing visitors to witness the massive scale of Mesopotamian temple architecture. Babylon. The city of Babylon, once a symbol of Mesopotamian power, has been excavated by teams from Germany and Iraq. The Ishtar Gate and the processional way have been partially reconstructed, giving modern observers a glimpse of how grand the city must have appeared in ancient times. Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire. Nineveh was excavated by Austin Henry Layard in the 1840s. The palace of Ashurbanipal and the royal library were uncovered, revealing detailed bas-reliefs that depict the king's military conquests and the everyday life of the Assyrian court. Modern technology and preservation. In the 21st century, digital technology has revolutionized the way archaeologists reconstruct ancient Mesopotamian sites. Techniques like 3D scanning, laser scanning, and virtual reconstruction allow researchers to create accurate digital models of ancient buildings and cities. These models help historians and archaeologists understand how these structures may have appeared when they were originally built, and can be used to preserve and protect the sites for future generations. Art and iconography. Mesopotamian art, including bas-reliefs, sculpture, and pottery. Mesopotamian art was not just decorative, it was also deeply tied to the religious and political life of the civilization. Art was used to tell stories, demonstrate royal power, and honor the gods. Bas-reliefs. One of the most famous forms of Mesopotamian art was the bas-relief, a type of sculptural artwork where figures are carved in shallow relief from a flat surface. Assyrian kings, in particular, used bas-reliefs to depict their military victories, their interactions with the gods, and their royal power. The lion hunt of Ashurbanipal, which depicts the king hunting lions, is one of the most famous examples. These bas-reliefs not only showcase the king's courage and dominance over nature, but also symbolized his divine favor. Sculpture. Mesopotamian sculpture was often monumental, created for both religious and political purposes. Statues of gods and royal figures were placed in temples and palaces to symbolize the presence of the divine and the authority of the king. The famous statue of Gudea of Lagash, for instance, portrays the king in a seated position, his expression one of piety and divine favor. Pottery. Pottery was not only practical, but also artistic. Mesopotamian potters created elaborate vases, jars, and plates, often decorated with scenes of gods, mythological creatures, and daily life. These pieces of pottery were used in rituals and offerings and provide a glimpse into the aesthetic sensibilities of the time. Religious symbols and the depiction of gods and kings' religion was at the center of Mesopotamian society, and their art was infused with symbols that represented the gods and divine rule. Temples were adorned with statues, reliefs, and paintings depicting the gods who controlled all aspects of life, from fertility to war to the afterlife. Depictions of gods in Mesopotamian art were often shown in human or anthropomorphic form, but with distinctive features that highlighted their divine nature. For example, the god Shamash, the sun god, was often depicted with rays emanating from his shoulders, symbolizing his power. Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, was frequently shown as a warrior slaying dragons or other monstrous figures. Depictions of kings. Kings were often portrayed as divine figures who were chosen by the gods to rule over humanity. These representations emphasize the close relationship between the king and the divine. The reliefs and statues of kings often showed them in heroic poses, receiving tribute from conquered peoples, or performing rituals to honor the gods. The gods were often depicted as warriors, creators, or defenders of cosmic order, and their depictions in Mesopotamian art were meant to demonstrate the balance of power between the divine and human realms. Technology and innovation. How Mesopotamians influenced the development of writing, mathematics, and other technologies. Mesopotamians were responsible for some of the earliest technological innovations that laid the foundation for later civilizations. Writing. The invention of writing in Mesopotamia revolutionized human communication and record-keeping. The Sumerians developed cuneiform to keep track of economic transactions, while Babylonians and Assyrians adapted this system to record literature, laws, and historical events. The invention of writing allowed for the preservation of knowledge, making it possible for future generations to access and build upon the intellectual achievements of earlier civilizations. Mathematics. The Babylonians were pioneers in the field of mathematics, particularly in the development of the sexagesimal system, base 60. This system influenced the way we measure time and angles today, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. Babylonians also developed the first known multiplication tables and early methods for solving algebraic equations. Technology and engineering. Mesopotamians were also innovators in engineering and technology. The wheel, plow, and irrigation systems were key inventions that transformed agriculture, trade, and transportation. Irrigation allowed Mesopotamian farmers to cultivate crops in the otherwise dry land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, ensuring food production for their growing cities. The architecture, art, and technological innovations of Mesopotamia were not only a reflection of its complex and dynamic society, but also laid the groundwork for the future development of civilizations in the ancient world. Through their urban planning, religious iconography, and innovations in technology, the Mesopotamians influenced Egypt, Greece, and Rome, shaping the course of history in ways that continue to resonate today. Modern archaeology has given us an invaluable glimpse into this ancient world, helping us to reconstruct the cities, the art, and the technologies that made Mesopotamia one of the most influential civilizations in history. Conclusion: the enduring legacy of Mesopotamia. Wrap-up of Mesopotamian achievements. As we conclude our deep dive into the civilization of Mesopotamia, it's essential to reflect on the profound contributions this ancient civilization made to the development of human history. From its early innovations in writing and mathematics to its religious influences and architectural wonders, Mesopotamia is often referred to as the cradle of civilization because of how foundational its achievements were for the civilizations that followed. Writing and record-keeping. Mesopotamians were the first to develop cuneiform writing, an essential innovation that allowed them to record their history, laws, trade, and religion. This breakthrough not only provided the foundation for future written languages, but also enabled knowledge transfer across generations, shaping future societies. The creation of law codes. The Code of Hammurabi is one of the earliest written legal systems and set the groundwork for future legal structures in many civilizations, including Roman and Western law systems. The principles of justice, punishment, and rights in the Code of Hammurabi have influenced modern ideas of fairness and governance. Engineering and technological innovation. The wheel, the plow, irrigation systems, and other innovations from Mesopotamia had an immediate impact on agriculture, transportation, and trade. These inventions helped transform society from agricultural settlements to urban centers, supporting the growth of the world's first cities, which would later be the foundation of human civilization. Architecture and urban planning. Mesopotamians revolutionized architecture with the construction of ziggurats, palaces, and city walls. The urban planning techniques they pioneered, such as the use of gridded streets, were adopted by later civilizations, including the Romans, Greeks, and Persians. Their cities were bustling centers of commerce, religion, and education, and their layout set the blueprint for future cities across the ancient world. Literature and religion. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest epic poems in history, explored human struggles with immortality, friendship, and divine intervention. Mesopotamian myths and religious stories, such as the Enuma Elish and the story of the Flood, have influenced later literary traditions, including Homer's epics and the Bible. The enduring influence. As we look at the lasting influence of Mesopotamian civilization today, it becomes clear that many aspects of modern life are built upon the foundations established by these ancient peoples. The influence on writing. Cuneiform writing, created by the Sumerians, was the earliest form of written communication and has left an enduring legacy. The alphabetic systems that later emerged, including the Phoenician alphabet, from which many modern languages are derived, owe much of their origin to the Sumerians. Modern record-keeping, literacy, and data management still follow systems of organization, numbering, and notation first developed by Mesopotamian scribes. Law and justice. The concept of codified law remains a major feature of modern legal systems around the world. The Code of Hammurabi influenced the concepts of justice, punishment, and fairness seen in countries today. The idea that there should be written laws to protect citizens and ensure fairness is as relevant today as it was in ancient Babylon. Science and mathematics. Mesopotamians were among the first to engage with mathematics on a broad scale, developing advanced numerical systems and methods for multiplication, division, and calculation. The Babylonians are credited with developing the sexagesimal, base 60 system that still influences modern timekeeping, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. Astronomy, too, benefited greatly from the Babylonian contributions, laying the groundwork for future developments in science. Technology. Mesopotamian technological innovations have had a profound influence on how we engage with everyday life today. The wheel and plow are still essential agricultural tools, and irrigation techniques continue to influence modern farming practices. The concept of written contracts, taxation, and administrative systems also have their roots in Mesopotamian civilization, shaping modern bureaucratic systems. Art and architecture. Mesopotamian art, especially their bas-reliefs, sculpture, and pottery, continues to influence how we understand ancient art. The Ishtar Gate, now housed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, is a prime example of Mesopotamian art influencing our modern perceptions of ancient beauty. The architecture of Mesopotamian palaces and ziggurats continues to inspire modern structures in both religious and secular buildings. The enduring legacy of Mesopotamia is evident in every corner of our modern world. From the writing systems we use to record information to the legal codes that govern our societies, the scientific methods that guide our exploration of the universe, and the art and architecture that continue to shape our cities, Mesopotamian contributions remain integral to our modern civilization. Explore ancient history. As we reflect on the incredible achievements of Mesopotamian civilization, I encourage you to dive deeper into ancient history and explore the rich cultures and civilizations that have paved the way for modern society. Whether through reading books, visiting museums, or engaging with online resources, there is always more to learn about the ancient world. Subscribe and learn more. If you've enjoyed this exploration of Mesopotamian civilization, don't forget to subscribe to learn more about the great civilizations of the ancient world and their continuing impact on our lives today. The journey through history is filled with fascinating stories, powerful ideas, and invaluable lessons that still resonate. Thank you for joining me today as we uncovered the timeless legacy of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization.